stream where we are going beyond the Kop, and we're going to be analysing and predicting Liverpool's upcoming Premier League fixture with Chelsea. And I'm honoured to be joined today by John Gibbons of the Anfield Wrap. If you don't know who he is, but you know who I am, you're living under a brick, because you can't be in this scene without knowing who the Anfield Wrap are. One of the most successful and top quality Liverpool content creation companies out there. John, thank you very much for joining. How are you doing?
Thanks for that lovely intro. Appreciate it.
It's all right, not a problem. I mean, look, it's the Anfield Wrap is just it's a huge conglomerate. It's this massive company. It's been going for years and years. And I think in terms of putting a voice out there, the Anfield Wrap's become one of the dominant forces in football content creation. Obviously, you've got Redmen and you've got all your other companies and things, but like we saw you on Sky the other day, that just speaks volumes about how far you've all come, and you absolutely smash it every day. So thank you so much for coming on. Just to break the ice, so to speak, to get this going, favourite Liverpool goal against Chelsea?
Oh, that is a great question. Do you know what? The one that jumped up straight away was, I'm going to say Garcia, but maybe not the one that people think. Actually, the 2006 FA Cup semi-final. I love that game. Winning at Old Trafford is winning at Old Trafford's great, and beating Chelsea's great. So combining the two is obviously quite unusual. But they were a really good team, that Chelsea season. I actually think the 05-06 team was even better than the one the year before, because they'd added the likes of Ballack and sorts of good players in there. I think Essien was playing by that time, and so it was a really good team. They'd grown and developed, and so we were up against it. But they started great. They played fantastic, and the Garcia. Would you call it a lob? Does a lob have to
Yeah.
It's I don't know if a lob has to be on the ground. People are very specific about these things, aren't they? But he went over Czech's head and over Czech's arm, sprawling arm, and went in, and it was some celebration. And yeah, that was a really fun day supporting Liverpool. So I'm going to go with that one. But there's a lot to choose from.
Oh, there's plenty. Some football purist out there is having a heart attack, by the way, based on that, on the lob discussion. Someone's having a stress somewhere. No, I mean, look, like you said, Chelsea and Liverpool, it's been a fixture it's Premier League through and through, and there has been some great goals. Jordan Henderson 2016, Jermaine Pennant 2007, that was a fantastic one. Salah 2019, like there's been so many you can go through, but the tides have definitely turned. Chelsea are no longer the dominant force in English football. That falls on Liverpool, two-time Premier League winners, 20-time league title winners, and Chelsea have the honour of being the first club this season to give us the Guard of Honour. So, I mean, going to Stamford Bridge has always been a bit of a turbulent ground for us. How are you feeling going into this? Want to say big fixture, but it's really not anymore at this stage. How are you feeling going into it?
Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? Because watched both Liverpool and Chelsea press conferences before, and Arne Slot was, talking about wanting to win the game, but not, being desperate for the 3 points. He was asked about the idea of, do you want to post this really high points total? And he sort of suggested he wasn't that bothered, really. Like, it wasn't something that drove him, it wasn't something that was a motivator for him. And then he, a little bit later on, said he will rotate just to look to get some of the players starts that have maybe deserved to start and haven't quite got one yet. So you're thinking the likes of Harvey Elliott, who's not started a Premier League game all season, which is remarkable, really. But that's it. The likes of Endo, I think, will play. So it will be a slightly weaker team, but I think these players will have a hunger to impress, and so might end up playing a little bit, with a bit more intensity than the ones they would have replaced. And so I think it can actually sometimes be a smarter thing, putting some of these players in a game where the league's already done. Chelsea, like you say, aren't at the heights, but they are fighting for something. They're fighting for one of the Champions League spaces. And Maresca did confirm your point about them giving a Guard of Honour. So that'd be something to look forward to. And obviously, if Endo does start, which I've just kind of suggested, I think will happen there, you get the gorgeous sight of Casido and Lavia, who turned down Liverpool, having to applaud the stopgap Endo onto the pitch. And so that'll be enjoyable. But the whole day is going to be enjoyable, and that's what happens when you're champions, is that you turn up and the sun's shining, and if you win, it's brilliant, and if you draw or lose, you're not delighted, but it's not the end of the world, and that's the beauty of having won it so early.
No, absolutely. We're in a very fortunate position in the same sort of way that we felt earlier on this season with the Champions League, where the last game was essentially a dead rubber and we were able to field all those rotation play. Well, there's no air quotes. The rotation players against PSV, and we actually saw some good displays in that match. We got to see some debuts. We got to see the likes of Chiesa perform well, Harvey Elliott, and like you said, this game is a chance to see those key players in the squad rested. And you alluded to Endo starting there, and we'll get into like the starting 11 prediction soon. But this is a Chelsea team who, it's not the same power it used to be. They haven't beat us at Stamford Bridge since 2020 in the FA Cup, and they beat us 2-0. I think it was Ross Barkley was one goal, and I can't quite remember who the second one was off the top of my head, but that was the last time they've won at Stamford Bridge. Since then, we've actually drew every trip that we've made there, and the other games that we've played, we've either won or they've been cup finals, which we've absolutely smashed them. So it's been a very mixed time these past few years against Chelsea. And like you said, their Slot did allude to some rotation. He did allude to the fact that there is going to be some players coming in that we maybe wouldn't expect. Is this a sort of an audition period, so to speak, for these lads, the likes of Chiesa, Elliott, to sort of say, I can be part of the plans next season?
I think so, yeah. I mean, the Honest Lot said before that it wasn't that, but I think if he was being honest, he would say there was an element of that. You know, I don't think it'll be a case of he's decided he wants to sell Harvey Elliott, then suddenly after 2 or 3 performances he changes his mind. I don't think it'd be that. I think if he's made his mind up on someone, I think, you know, a few games at the end of a season when the league's won won't necessarily change it. But what I think these players can do is just say to the manager, listen, next year if you are wanting to rotate more, I'm there. I'm dependable. I could deliver the goods for you. Or even if you're not starting me and it's not going well, look to the bench. I'm there. And it's just, you know, forcing yourself into the manager's mind a little bit more in situations when he's either looking to rotate or looking to mix it up from the bench. And so I think that's what they've got a chance to do for the rest of the season. And then, of course, there's a pre-season, and it's a big pre-season for most of the players because he's going to have the full squad. You know, lots of teams are going off to the World Club Cup and stuff like that. But Honest Lot, I think, he'd be quite glad that he's not, because I think last summer he was obviously new in the post, and then players were coming back, like often happens with international tournaments, you know, bit by bit. Whereas this time he's going to have them all to work with, and so I think there's another opportunity there for lots of players to grab a claim for the start. But in these games in particular, I think for some of these players, you are able to maybe say, listen, I know you haven't used me loads this year, but next year, you know, I won't let you down if you do throw me a chance.
Yeah, and I mean, there's like Federico Chiesa is someone who like has been not dominating headlines as such, but he has been a constant talking point these past few weeks about the fact that he can't get a game. And then the reports are coming out that because of the performance against Plymouth, that's maybe why he hasn't been included in the squad, which I'm not sure how much of that I personally believe. It is something that will have been taken into consideration, but not a lot of players were great on that day. But with it being sort of pointed out that Slot is going to rotate a bit more, there is still an important factor that we do need to conclude this season strong. If you go back to when we won the league in 2020, you know, we lost to Arsenal, City, we drew against Everton and Burnley, and it felt a little bit like we obviously didn't limp over the line. We smashed it out the park and won the league as like one of the most dominant teams ever. But it was a little bit sort of deflating at points. Obviously, there was no crowd and stuff. So is it important for us to finish this league as strong as possible? Or do you sort of think, you know, it's not the end of the world if we do drop the odd point here or there against these 4 remaining teams?
No, I think they want to finish strong. And I think it is important that we finish strong, especially when you look at the games. And so going to Chelsea, like you've talked about the rivalry over the years and mentioned some of those games, they want to go there and play well, I think. So whoever he picks, you don't need 3 points for the title, but I think for professional pride and being able to sort of go there as champions and play like champions, I think it will be important to them. And then the Arsenal game, I think is, I was going to say it's massive. It's not massive, but I think, you know, you don't want a situation where you're champions and then you're getting turned over on your own ground by the team who've been saying, "Oh, if it wasn't for referees or injuries, we'd be sort of there." And so I think Arsenal is at home is a bit of an opportunity to make a statement. And so I think that's another game that they'll really want to go strong. They want to play well, and they want to show that by any measure they're the best team in the country, and so I think the Arsenal one they'll treat as a big game. I think we'll see a little bit of rotation for Chelsea. I think it'll go back to the starting 11, and then Brighton you might see a little bit more again. I think, and then the Palace one is. You lifting the trophy, and you've got to lift the trophy after the win, and you've got to lift the trophy after the win. Do you know what I mean? Or Virgil feel a bit silly, and no one wants that. And so I think there's when you start talking through the games, you start thinking, well, they are still big games, and they are still games where the players will want to perform and play well. And so I've no doubt really that we're maybe the exception of Brighton that you'll see a Liverpool that will pretty closely resemble the Liverpool that we've seen all season, and that team has normally won.
Absolutely. I am hopeful that we can sort of end this season on, I mean, we're ending it on a high anyway, but if we can just end it on a bit of good momentum heading into next season, like you perfectly said, we've got a full pre-season with the whole squad. There's going to be new players coming in. It's going to be an exciting summer window. And with that in mind, like we are going to move into the starting 11 prediction for this Chelsea match because we've touched on the rotation. And as much as we're looking forward to players coming in, there are a few players who will have to stake a claim for being in this team next season. And there's a few players who are in this squad now who their futures are quite uncertain. And there are a few who are going to be potentially moving on. So with that in mind, we'll start off with goalkeeper. Now, Alisson has been the best goalkeeper in the world for, arguably the past 5 years or so. He's top tier. Kelleher is the one that's got the question marks around him. Obviously, Mamardashvili is going to be coming in the summer, but Kelleher wants first-team football. That's been reported a few times over the past 2 years as such, and the valuation of him is around 30 to 40 million. Is there an argument to say that Kelleher starts these last few games in an effort to sort of put him out there to the market and say, look at this goalkeeper, this is what you could have? Or is there then a risk of sort of playing him? He does make... I mean, touch wood, he doesn't, but there could be a high-profile blunder, which could sort of put a negative spin on it going into the summer market, so to speak.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, mate. I haven't really thought about it from that side. I was thinking, well, he's probably going, so I wouldn't mind seeing him one last time and giving him one last game. And so I had sort of have my eye on him. I had my eye on Brighton away as one maybe where he could say, because I think Alisson, you want to start Alisson against Palace last home game of the season, the day we were lifting the trophy. I think you start your number one goalkeeper in that. But so the idea of maybe giving him, and Arsenal's massive for the reasons I said before. And so I think the idea of giving him Brighton, almost telling him now, and so we can get all his family over and stuff like that. Give Cork half the away end for Brighton, and just let them sort of, have a big Kelleher celebration. I think will be quite nice. But I think your point on shot window and is an interesting one. I don't think there's anything he could do to damage his reputation too much because I think it is very high because of his performances. But I think a really good performance against a team like Chelsea, might tempt a few more out, including Chelsea, by the way, who haven't got a goalkeeper cemented down and haven't done for a while. I mean, we all remember the money they spent on Kepa straight after we bought Alisson, and I think it's fairly clear who got the better deal, considering Kepa's on loan at Bournemouth, and they're still sort of rooting through them, and Ali's, like you say, a champion and a phenomenal keeper. So I think Kelleher, the idea of playing him away at Chelsea, I could see the benefit of that as well, and I could see, how a good performance there might help Richard Hughes eke a few more million out, or maybe tempt a couple more, into the market, because you'd like to see him get a really good move because he deserves to be playing at a high level. And so I think you've talked me into starting Kelleher in this one.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, Kelleher is he's the best backup in Europe. Arguably, like he's up there with the best in that regard, and he is too good to be a backup. He's at the age where he needs to be getting consistent first team football, and he could easily do it. And I'm in the same boat. I think against Chelsea, he does get the start. Alisson should definitely start that last game, and maybe even start him against Arsenal, just because, like you said, there's bragging rights, so to speak, of that. We don't want to go into that game and come out as a sort of, well, this could have happened. We could have won the league if this didn't happen. So. Yeah, I think Kelleher for Chelsea makes sense. Now, they're moving into the defensive back four. All season, it's been basically Van Dijk, Canate inarguably starting. Twanta could get a game or two as we come to this final stretch. Do you see that being against Chelsea, or do you see us sticking with the same back two in the centre-back areas?
No, I think he'll stick with this one, mate. Like you say, it wouldn't surprise you maybe see Quanta get a start between now and the end of the season, but I think... For Chelsea, I think you'll want to go pretty strong. I think arguably if Joe Gomez was near a fitness, you'd be full fitness, you'd be more likely to see him because of his experience. But I think Quanta's had a tough year, and I think throwing him in fairly cold against Chelsea. I can't remember whether his last start was at centre half. Obviously, he plays a couple of right back, but I think throwing him in fairly cold against good opposition, I think is tough. So I'd be looking to go Virgil Karate in this one.
Yeah. I think Quanta's last start might have been PSV. I'm not 100% certain.
Yeah, it is around there. It is around there. Yeah.
No, I agree. And look, Quanta is an interesting case. He obviously had that first half sub against Ipswich, but how do you feel about Joe Gomez this summer? Because there's a lot of talks about he could be one of the players that does have to make way for us to bring in acquisitions. Do you think it's time for us to see him move on after 10 years at the club? Like, he's the only player to have actually been at the club before Jurgen Klopp's era. Like, is it time to see him move, or would you like to keep him maybe one more season as a sort of versatile backup option, so to speak?
Yeah, see, this is why I'd be a rubbish sporting director, because I love Joe Gomez. So I'd just be like, I just take one look at his lovely face and think, let's give him a new contract. And then everyone would be like, well, his injury record and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, yeah, but look at him. He's, like you said,
you can't say no to that. Look at him.
Like you say, he's been at the club for such a long time now. And he's our longest serving player. And his quality, his versatility, I think, is always an asset. I think it's a question as much for him, and you mentioned it with Kelleher before, this idea of what does he want? It's what does Joe Gomez want? In my mind, he probably is fourth choice centre half next season. I think what I would prefer to see us do is to sign a centre half, to loan out Quansah, and then for Gomez to do one more year as fourth choice centre back, probably do a little bit of full back maybe as well as it comes up if need be, and then move on for Quansah next year. That would be my ideal. But how that sounds to Joe Gomez is another factor, and he might think, well, listen, I just want to go and play, and that is fair enough. And so I think for the manager, and I think for maybe even for the sport directors and people like that, I think it's probably likely to be player driven, that one, I think.
Yeah. I mean, Newcastle was the one last summer where they were obviously trying to get Gahey, and that was a whole thing. So we could have potentially seen a move last summer if like the domino effect had started and Gahey had gone to Newcastle, Gomez could have gone Palace, like something like that. But yeah, I'm the same. I think Gomez is someone who, if he did leave, I'd be sad, but I can maybe understand the rationale. He wants game time. He'd get a good sum for him as well. And that's the same with left back, because obviously Robertson's been coming out today saying that he wants a new contract, and I think rightfully so. I think Robertson's someone you can't underestimate or overestimate how important he is to this team in a leadership role, his personality. But also, we're going to be needing a vice captain if Trent does move on, and I would like to see Robertson maybe get that responsibility. But Tsimikas, on the other hand, is the one who's potentially being sold this summer also. Like, where do you stand with him potentially going? And against Chelsea, would you be starting Robertson or Tsimikas?
Yeah, I'd go Robertson in this one, just because I think Tsimikas has had some game time recently, and so it doesn't really feel like a rotation that's necessary. And indeed, it's not like some of the other guys where you think, he deserves a game, give him a go. I think he's had a decent go recently. Tsimikas starts a couple of games in a row, and so I think I'll be looking to go with Robbo in this one, and he'd probably be where I go next year. I think we need a new left back, and I think most Liverpool fans agree with that. And then you're looking at it and say, well, who's the other left back, or the number two, if you want to call it that, or just the other competing left back, as the manager would maybe call it. And then you think, well, do you want someone like Tsimikas, who's a decent player, good set piece delivery, would very much be the number two, or do you want Andy Robertson, who's near the end of his career, aging, but got all of his experience, all the stuff around the dressing room, the professionalism that you were sort of talking about at a high level, but you don't necessarily want sort of starting every week right now. I think the Robertson option feels more sensible, and you get a higher, I think you get a higher overall standard of left back performance from whoever you pick. If it was this new younger left back, say Kerkers, for example, and a Robertson who's able to to come in, and the manager can, then choose to take his time with Kirkus a little bit if he wants to, or just say to him, well, listen, the intensity's high at Liverpool, so you're going to play more often than not, but likely just once a week. And he's able to sort of make those decisions like managers often try to do with a new side, and with the idea of, well, if the other guy plays, it's fine, so we don't need to rush anything. I think that sort of makes more sense. And so I'm not someone who's desperate to sell Chimikas, but I think we need a new left back. We need the next outstanding left back, and I think we need the someone who you're going to say, yes, this guy is definitely starting for us in 1 or 2 years' time, and we feel like it's going to be it's got a really high ceiling and could be top class for this side. And I think you get him in, and then it's, well, who makes sense to be the other one? And for me, it makes more sense to eke the last couple of years out of Andy Robertson and passing on all his wisdom and things like that, rather than having a more obvious number two in there. That's the way I would sort of prefer to go.
I'm in complete agreement. I think this left back scenario has reached its peak. I don't think Tsimikas can get any better than he particularly is at the moment. I do think you could get a good fee for him, and he's a talented left back. Like, he would get into, I've said a few times, like, I think he'd get into 5 or 6 maybe Premier League starting 11s. I think he's a very, very good player. He's good on the ball, good set piece. It is just that defensive aspect of it, and I would rather see Kirkes with a Robertson as a rotation option more so than a Robertson as Tsimikas. So yeah, I think Robertson against Chelsea makes complete sense. And right back is the same sort of thing. Obviously, Trent has been done to death. So I want to sort of discuss the Conor Bradley, because Slot said a few weeks ago that Conor Bradley is getting back up to full fitness. He wants to sort of see if he can play more and more. And I think that sort of hints at the fact that maybe next season we could see him as the first teamer. Maybe we will see a bit more of him. How have you been feeling towards Conor Bradley this season, his performances when he's been on the pitch?
Yeah, I really like him. And I think it's just, how many games a season you can get it from him at the moment. I'm not worried long term about these injuries. I think it can happen with young players, especially ones who are growing. And you see pictures of him when he was younger. He was tiny, and so he's really shot up. He's filled out, and I think a lot of footballers have issues with their body as it's sort of still growing. And so I'm not worried about him long term, but then obviously, the manager's got to think about next season and think about, well, how many games is it fair and reasonable to expect from this guy, and what are we looking at? Similar to the left back thing, well, what kind of profile do we want our 2 right backs to be? And I think, if we're all assuming that Trent goes, then someone sort of will come in, and I think it'll be someone of a good standard, because it has to be someone who, you need to be expected to be starting big games, because Bradley can't play them all, and in fact, might have a similar season next year to this one in terms of injuries. And so long term, got no worries about him. I think he's a fantastic player, really good attitude, a lot of quality, and I think he'll be a Liverpool player for a long time. But we will be interested to see who they play alongside him. And I do think, treating this period as a little bit of an audition process like we talked about for next year, I think it's probably the most the case for him. I think he's got, in a way, the most approved, in terms of racking these games up. I think this one might come a little bit early for him. I think when you were listening to the manager before, he was like, we'll train today and we see. I just think they'll go for Trent again in this game. But you never know.
No, I mean, it makes complete sense. And Conor Bradley is a terrific player going forward. He ranks in the top 2% of fullbacks in the Premier League for carries, total distance carried, and touches in the attack, and third. Like, he is a very good player in a very different way to Trent. He's not well renowned for his ball delivery, even though he can put a cross in. He's better at coming inverted, and he likes to make things happen, cutbacks. And he is someone who I would like to see get the game time. Against Chelsea, Trent, absolutely fine with that stuff, with him starting. Like, it makes complete sense. He's been terrific lately. Nothing against it. But the midfield 3 is the one that we'll move on to next after we've picked our goalkeeper and back 4. So it's, at the moment, I think it was Kelleher, Robertson, Van Dijk, Konate, Trent, pretty strong back 5 altogether. The midfield's where things do get a little bit more, not twisted, but obviously you've got Harvey Elliott, where there's been a lot of discussion about his game time. There's people saying he could move on. There's people saying he could stay. You've also got Curtis Jones, who I think's made a good account of himself at moments this season, but he has had a few games where he has been a bit hit and miss. are we sticking with the same midfield three of Szoboszlai, McAllister, and Gravenberch, or would you be maybe looking at resting one or two of them, particularly Gravenberch and McAllister, who, let's be honest, they've ran their hearts out this season and they look battered, like the amount of abuse they've had this season on the pitch.
Yeah, I'd swap all three, honestly, just because I think the like you say, the miles and the miles and the legs that they've got this season. Wouldn't it be awful if right at the end of the season Gravenberch broke down and then you're thinking, well, going into into preseason next year, it'd be a rubbish thing. And so I think the three of them have given everything, every ounce of sweat has come out of them to help Liverpool get to this league title. And I think for this one, I'd be bringing them back in for Arsenal, but for this one, I'd be sitting them all out, because I also think that the Endo, Curtis Jones, and Harvey Elliott is a really good midfield and a good enough midfield for this game. Obviously, Chelsea are probably strongest in midfield, and so you need to watch that. And you can have sort of players on the bench, but I think Endo's a really good player, really tidy player, and I think deserves a start. I think Jones has been a bit unlucky not to start last couple of weeks, and so you wanted to be getting him here. And I think Harvey Elliott, when he's talking about in the press conference starting players who maybe have deserved to start but I couldn't get them in there, surely feels like one of the ones that he is talking about. And so I'd go the three of them, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's what the manager does.
No, I completely agree. I think Elliott's someone who, he can get a lot of stick. I think sometimes his press can feel a little bit just run and run and run and run, but there isn't a lot of substance to it at moments. But he still ranks in the top 15% for tackles in the attack and third, as well as recording 1.49 blocks and 1.19 passes blocked per 90. Like, he's great at pressing, and he's good at bringing energy into the starting 11. We saw that earlier this season against Southampton. We saw it last season against Wolves and Newcastle. When he came on, he made a big impact. I would like to see him get the game time. Do you think there's a world where he could potentially leave this summer, or do you think that it feels like we're creating another problem for ourselves, which we're going to have to bring in another player to replace Elliott?
It's a hard one, really. I don't think he'll go. If you're asking me for my instinct on what will happen, I think he'll be a Liverpool player next. He'll be a Liverpool player next summer. I think, there are positions that it feels like that we're more likely to prioritise. You've got the number 9 question mark, which will obviously come out onto. We talked there about left back. We talked there about probably needing a right back. I mentioned another centre half, which I think they'll do. And so there's 4 players there that Liverpool pretty much need next year. I would argue, certainly in 3 cases, and the centre half, I think they'd be wrong not to get another one in there. And then, they were looking at more deeper midfielders last summer. I think they'll probably go in there again. And so you're thinking, well, do you want a player who can play a little bit deeper and can give Gravenberch a bit more of a rest, and maybe start a bit more than what Endo has, and or maybe sometimes you could play him with Gravenberch and McAllister could have a rest, or do you go for a more forward option when there is, Szoboszlai, when there's Elliott, and we've seen Jones play and score from there as well. I think that they're more likely to prioritise that deep midfielder if they do want one. And so, I've said 5 areas of the pitch there where you'd rather strengthen rather than trying to think, well, what we're going to do about, replacing Harvey Elliott. And so I think for me, it's almost one for next year, and everyone will have a lot more information next summer. He will, because he's had a disappointing year, but is that, because the manager doesn't necessarily fancy him, or was it circumstance, or was it the injury that sort of scuppered his season, and then he struggled to get back into rhythm? What was it? Well, he'll know a little bit more. But I think because of his love of Liverpool, I think he'll want to stay, and I think the club will be prepared to have him around a little bit longer, just because they know that when you do throw him in, he's going to give everything he's got. So I fully expect Harvey Elliott to stay, and I'd be shocked if there's a big enough offer to tempt Liverpool, and also a big enough offer to him, because when you see the clubs who are being linked with him, it is quite a step down, and there's taking a step down, and then there's taking a step down from the club that you support and love and love as much as me and you, mate. Yeah. And so So I think it's a massive decision for him to leave Liverpool. I'd be surprised if he did it off the back of one disappointing season.
No, I'm in complete agreement. And I think the thing I love about Harvey Elliott is he plays like, if you'd grabbed a fan off the street and said, right, you go play for the club, he plays like that. Like, he will just work his arse off, he will run. And he doesn't so much when he has these interviews and people say, he disappointed with your game time, this and that. He doesn't seem bothered in a set. Like, I can't explain it. He's not making a big stink about it. He's not kicking off being like, yeah, I want game time, blah, blah. He's always got I'll do what's best for the team. I'll do what's best for the manager. I'll do what I'm asked to do. And he's got a great mentality, so I'd love to see him stay. Badge Titch is another player that has been said that he's been going to be given the pre-season to see whether he's good enough in the team. And I stand by as well that I think we do need that another defensive-minded player to rotate around Gravenberch, because at the moment you've got Endo, who love Endo. He's a brick shit house. I love that type of player. But he's not as good on the ball as Gravenberch. You've got Tyler Morton, who the odds of him staying beyond this summer seem pretty slim. So we do need that other option there. And so if we've got a fully rotated midfield, which is necessary, but the front three is the one which has really got people talking, because there's a lot of reports, Nunez going potentially, Diaz, Chiesa, Jota, they're not being sort of pushed, so to speak, but they will listen to offers. Do any of them get the nod this? Well, I mean, at least one of them has to, but do any of them get the nod in particular against Chelsea? And we've got Salah as well, who probably could do with the rest. What's your rationale for that front three? And we'll go more into depth on it.
Yeah, like you say, mate, it's the most fascinating selection of the weekend, because whatever he does in midfield, whether he swaps all three, like I've said, or he swaps one or two or even none, you don't necessarily see it as a negative for the ones who he hasn't picked. It's more like, oh, he's gone for that. You could understand, the logic or thinking behind it. Whereas up top, I think people will be reading so much into whoever he does start. Obviously, there's this ongoing thing with Nunez and the rumours around this 50th start and money to his past club if they do, and so that's going to be sort of an interesting one. If he doesn't pick Nunez, then who is it? Is it Jota? I think if he goes with Salah, Gakpo, and then Diaz again at 9, I think that's a pretty strong indictment against both Jota and Nunez, to be honest with you, because I understand why he's been picking it. Because he's wanted results and he's picking his 3 players who've generally he's got the most out of. But having had the League One, I think if he doesn't pick a number 9 in this game, if I was either their agent, I'd be saying, listen, let's start the car. As David Lloyd said on the cricket, you know what I mean? It's time. It's time for us to go. And so, I think, he's he hasn't got to pick one of his number 9s in this one, but I think if he doesn't, then I think that it shows where he's at with both of them. I do think he'll pick Jota. I think that's the one that he'll go for. I do think he'll pick Salah, because Salah will have his eye on his individual records and what he wants to do this season, and I think the club will respect that. So I actually think Salah will start probably 3 out of the 4 games, and we'll maybe and hopefully see Chiesa in one of them, because I think he does deserve it. But I think Chiesa will understand that Salah's got these records in his sights and he'll want to break them. And we haven't seen too much in terms of different positions from Chiesa, which has been quite interesting. I thought we'd have seen a bit more kind of versatility from him, but save for a couple from the bench, we've generally seen him in that role. But so I think he'll do Salah, I think he'll do Jota, and then it's just that left hand side, and it's largely just been a bit of a straight shootout between Gakpo and Diaz. So I think it will be one of those. So I'll go Diaz.
I mean, it's not a bad problem to have when you've got Gakpo and Diaz as your
it's probably the strongest. If you think the manager wants 2 for each place, it's probably where the manager feels he's strongest early.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and he's made the problem for himself, because he said at the beginning Gakpo is a left winger. He is playing as a left winger, and we've been crying out for that for a season and a half beforehand. So he's made it his own, that position at points. And it's always felt like when Diaz is off form, Gakpo's on it. And then when Gakpo's coming off, Diaz is in for, we've been very fortunate that's been happening. But Chiesa, like you said, he's been a very or he is a versatile player. We haven't seen a great deal of him, but against PSV, he was out on the left wing. Against Newcastle, he tended to drift inside, come a bit more central. Do you think there's any argument to say that we might see him in that number 9 role before the season's over, or do you think that's just a bit of a pipe dream?
No, I don't. I don't think it'll happen. Just because this manager hasn't shown a huge indication yet to have done that, and I don't think that's something he'll choose to have a look at between now and the end of the season. So, no, I will be surprised, to see that at this stage.
Mm. And I mean, lastly, before we go over like the players that we've picked, the Nunez discussion, something that's come up time and time again. I'd love to get your thoughts on what you've made of Nunez's time at Liverpool. The odds of him sticking around, I think, are fairly slim beyond the summer. If he does go, how will he overall be regarded by the fan base as a whole, do you think?
Yeah, I think when he does go, move on in the summer, and like you say, it looks most likely. I think it's got to be viewed overall as a disappointment. I don't think it's been a nightmare signing. I've seen some people say, "Oh, it's the worst Liverpool signing of all time," and I don't think you can. I don't think you can put it in that bracket. I understand the arguments over the fee and things like that, maybe the expectation, but he has had good moments. He's had good games. There just hasn't been enough of them, and I think when you're competing at the very highest level, and that's what Liverpool are, they're champions, you need not just your number 9, but for all your players to be consistent, to be, at the top level more often than not, really. And everyone can have the odd bad game. We've seen Salah have bad games, but I think, they need to be rare. And I think for Nunez, he's just been too inconsistent and just not at the required level for enough time when he's been on the pitch. And there's obviously question marks a little bit about his temperament as well. If he comes off the bench and misses a sitter, then his head completely goes, and you sort of can't really have that as well. You could imagine him in a Champions League final, just having a nightmare and getting himself sent off or something, and you just like. I think ultimately he's not reliable, and I think especially a manager like Arne Slot, who's very calm and considered, I think reliability is a big factor. I don't think he's one of these type of managers who go, "Oh, I'll just pick a bit of a wild card and see what happens." I don't think he wants that. And so I think that's ultimately what's going to do for him, really. It's not that he's rubbish. It's not that, he's the worst Liverpool player of all time. He's just not consistently good enough at the very highest level. And so I think that's what I'll see him end up moving on. And I think, asking about kind of how Liverpool fans will ultimately view him. I think it will be with some good memories, but ultimately a player who wasn't quite good enough to play for Liverpool. And there's a long list of those, do you know what I mean? And it's not like, it's nothing to be like ashamed of in a way, like you try players, some of them work out. I think because we've got such a remarkable hit rate recently on transfers, you kind of forget that for most clubs, more often than not, they don't work. It's can you move them on? That's why the age profile is important. Is can you move them on? Can you find somewhere, don't take too much of a hit on it and move on and get the next one? That's how most clubs operate. It's just because that we've, it's quite rare for Liverpool to make a sidestep. We're used to signing players for 35 million, like Mo Salah, and then they turn into superstars, and that's obviously the way to do it if you can, but it doesn't always work. Often it's like with Nunez, where you get someone in, they're a bit raw, you hope you can mold them into something. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And so I think in this case, it's got to be put down to one that got away.
No, absolutely. And like Nunez, if we can go into the summer and we can recoup around 65 million, which is the touted fee from Saudi, all in all, we've lost money, but it's not bad business, so to speak. Obviously, there's been Newcastle, Forest, Bournemouth, Brentford. Like, he's had those big match-winning moments. Yeah. And like you said, he came at a time where it was Jörg Schmadtke and Jurgen Klopp were the ones coordinating transfers. And he came in a position where we didn't necessarily want a striker. I don't think that was the particular out-and-out transfer that we wanted. All the eyes were in the back four or CDM. Like, he was never the player that we needed at the time, but we've had worse. We've had Sean Dundee, we've had Andre Voronin, we've had like El Hadji Diouf. We've had so much worse up front. Nunez should not be considered the worst, but I do think if you're in your third season as our most expensive player, you can't have question marks over whether or not you're good enough. You either are or you aren't. And sadly, it's not worked out like you said, and I don't see him starting against Chelsea, but I do think he can contribute as we go on through the season, which brings us nicely to starting 11 overall, because we have selected Keane Kelleher in goal. We've then got Andrew Robertson, Virgil van Dijk, Ibrahim Konate, and Trent as the back four. We sort of agreed on a fully rotated three. I mean, Endo, Jones, and Elliott, they all need the game time. And to be honest, like you said, at this point, it's not sort of who's asked, but we're going to get the guard of honor. Beyond then, do whatever. I don't care if it's another 5-3 shootout like it was in 2020 against Chelsea. Just have fun with it. And then we've sort of gone for the front three of it was Salah, and did we say Diaz and Gakpo? Was that the sort of the more likely?
I went Diaz and Jota. That's
Diaz
what
and
I
Jota.
went for. If I can talk you into that,
I'd be happy with that. Look, I mean, Jota, there's still a talented player there, and I would like to see him sort of get a bit of game time, because I'm not 100% convinced he's going to stick around this summer either. Gakpo has been a bit off the boil, and I think maybe I would like to see him just get the rest now that we can rest him. He's just come back from an injury. He hasn't been the same since then. I would like to see him maybe rested beyond then. But overall, I mean, we've picked the team. What's your score prediction for this match, and final thoughts going into this match at Stamford Bridge, where we will receive our first guard of honor of the season as 20-time league champions?
Yeah, it's hard to know what to predict, isn't it? Because it's hard to know exact team he's going to go. We've just made some changes there, and we feel like it's strong, and there's a lot of players with something to prove. But Chelsea have got a bit of a fight to them, so it feels like maybe the most likely result is a draw. But it wouldn't surprise you at all if it is a Liverpool win, because they've proved time and time again this season that they know how to get it done. And so I wouldn't be shocked at all if Liverpool win the game. But I do think the most likely result is probably a draw.
No, I'd be in the same bracket. I think Chelsea, like you said, they've still got it all to play for, but they are still, they're still in a European competition, so they might have an eye on there. They'd probably like to win a trophy before it comes. CB says 3-0 Liverpool. I hate Chelsea, lol. I mean, don't let your personal feelings sway your narrative. That's fine. We all hate Chelsea, but 3-0 might be a bit much. And then Wade says, when is 10 fascinating facts about Liverpool's 97-98 season coming out? That's coming out in a week. That's all typed out, ready to go. I just need to record that and get that edited. John, what's just a really quick one for that? Who was your favourite player in the 97-98 season, if you remember?
I mean, it was probably Robbie Fowler, I would say. I know that's a bit captain obvious, but I think for Eddie, kind of like, Scouse kid in the mid-90s, it was normally Robbie. And so, yeah, I'd say Fowler. It's probably it's a bit soon to be Stevie Gerrard there. So, I think I was still in the full Fowler era at that point.
It's a bit before, 97 was the year I was born, so it was a bit before my time, unfortunately. But don't worry, that video will be coming out very soon. I've also got another 2 lined up. We've got every Liverpool and Arsenal double agent ranked from worst to best. And we've also got 10 positives from Arne Slot's first season. Thank you so much, John, for coming on. Really, really appreciate it. If no one has already, and I think you're mental if you haven't, let's be honest, head over to the Anfield Wrap. Make sure to subscribe to them, one of the biggest Liverpool channels out there. And yeah, thank you very much to John for coming on. Any last words before we shoot off, mate?
No, just appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. It's been fun.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Everyone, please make sure to click like and subscribe. We're almost at 4,500. So if you can do that, that'd be fantastic. And we'll see